For reference in the future. Welcome everyone to the April 26th general membership meeting. We have a great program for you today, and then we also have uh, some business to cover later on in the agenda. As the meeting goes on, I'll be able to get people hooked in. And so with that, we'll get started right into our program, and we have Chris who will do the intro. Chris?
Yeah, well, the real question here is whether Andy needs an intro, but I'm going to extend the courtesy to Andy that we extend to all of our other guests.
Okay.
So as many of us already know, Andy is professor.
Whoop, you checked out there. You
Sam,
somehow
did you
got
mute
muted.
me?
Somebody muted you.
Somebody muted me.
Maybe it was me. I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm trying to get back on.
Hold on a second. Okay, so we all know that Andy's professor emeritus of economics and statistics. But fewer of us know that he also served on the research staff of the President's Council of Economic Advisors. Don't ask which president that was. It was about 6 or 7 presidents ago, I think.
Right.
And he was also on the research staff of the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. He was Community and Human Services Commissioner for 8 years. He's active in Inclusive Claremont and on the board of the Claremont University Club. So he's quite involved locally and quite involved nationally. So without further ado, I introduce you to Andy Winnick, who's going to take us on a nonpartisan deep dive into the 2020 election results.
Okay,
Andy, it's all yours.
Yeah, let's see if this works now. Is that up on your screens?
Yes.
Okay. All righty. So let's get started. First, I want to start just by saying that, and I'm trying to decide which glasses to wear when I do this with this one here. I think I'll do this. Anyhow, that this election, like all of the elections every 4 years, are really 4 totally different sets of elections, all being conducted on the same day. There are local elections for city, county, school districts, whatever. There are state elections, that is for governors and the legislatures and maybe some initiatives or referendums. There's obviously congressional elections and of course the presidential election. And there are times when those have somewhat consistent results, but lots of times when that's not true. And this was certainly one of those times. The Dems clearly won the presidential election. That we will talk about that, but lost the statewide election, the state elections, with mixed results at the local and congressional level. So let's start out with at the local, and we'll work our way up to the presidential. At the local level, in LA, we had a progressive DA and Measure J, which were progressive measures that are clearly were victories. And nationally, interestingly enough, at the local level, despite some of the conservative victories at the state level, there are a number of the local areas actually made some significant criminal justice reforms, either for the police or related issues. For us in California, if we move to the state level, we gained 2 senators, two Democratic senators, but the Dems lost one in the assembly, but they retain their 2/3 majority. There's the imbalance is rather astounding. 31-9 now in the Senate, down 1, 59-19 in the Assembly. The important thing is those supermajorities allow the legislature to pass tax measures, expenditure measures, and so forth, and also to override a governor's veto anytime they want. So it puts the legislature in a very powerful position. However, on the proposition level, it was very different. And we had a number of progressive measures in California that lost. One would have allowed rent control. It didn't force it, didn't mandate it. It just gave localities the ability to do rent control. That lost. We tried to get rid of cash bail. That lost. We tried to get labor protections for the gig workers. That lost. We tried to increase property taxes on corporations and only on large corporations, and that lost. Now, most of these won in the LA area and the San Francisco area, but the voting in the more conservative parts of the state, primarily the Central Valley and the far north, meant that all those propositions lost. The only proposition that the progressives were supporting that won was the one to allow parolees to vote. So they now can, people who are on parole from prison can vote. They don't have to wait until their parole is over. Nationally, if we look at the statewide votes, the Republicans won overwhelmingly. The ratio of governors was 26 Republicans to 24 Democrats. The governors won one, so the Democrats lost Montana. I give this talk elsewhere, so I talk about nonpartisan. Here I can be a bit more partisan. So we won one in Montana. But now it is, or we lost one in Montana rather. So it's now 27 governors to 23, but that understates what's going on, as I'll explain in a minute. There were 4 Democratic governors up for election, 1 lost. There were 7 Republicans up for election, every one of them won. So the Democrats did not flip a single governors. In the legislative houses, the Republicans also won. Most states, except for Nebraska, have 2 houses. They call them different things. The Dems lost 2, both in New Hampshire. So New Hampshire went from having 2 Democratic state legislative bodies to 2 Republican. So the mix now is that both houses are Republican in 30 states. Now that's important for redistricting, which is going to happen. Democrats have both houses only in 18 states, and there's 1 state that has 1 House Democrat, 1 House Republican. What's really important are what's called trifectas, which are when you have the same party controlling both houses of the legislature and the governorship. And there the Republicans increased their trifectas by 2. So they now have 23 states in which they control all 3 of those places. The Democrats have only 15, and in 12 it's split. The point is that the Republicans have a big, big edge for redistricting. And the redistricting results were supposed to be out already. For whatever reasons, and we can conjecture on that on a number of bases, that hasn't happened. The results are just coming out now, but the detailed results that will allow the states to do their redistricting will probably not be available to the end of the summer. One of the issues is that House Resolution 1, on voting and everything, calls for all states to create commissions, nonpartisan commissions, to do the redistricting. That would be, as in California, where there's a mixture of Democrats, Republicans, and non-declared who do the redistricting, rather than having the party and the party legislatures do the redistricting. There's a very interesting legal question. We have no idea how this is going to turn out. If we were to pass HR 1, that would mandate commissions in all states. That could make a big, big difference. There's no question that the Republicans will challenge it, but what we have is the 3 states that have commissions right now are California, Arizona, and Virginia. The Arizona decision to have commissions was challenged by the Republicans. That went all the way to the Supreme Court. And in their last session, the Supreme Court supported the creation of commissions. And some of you have heard another lecture I give on voter suppression and all, and know that the Constitution says that the timing, manner, and control of elections is up to the state legislatures. And the Republicans argued that meant that the legislatures got to do the redistricting. But since the decision to go to redistricting was made by the people in referendums in all 3 states, the Supreme Court held that that was legal and that would stand. However, you can believe that they're going to fight like hell to make sure that the commissions, if HR 1 passes, that issue gets adjudicated, and this Supreme Court, with its new member and everything, is quite capable of overturning the decision of the last Supreme Court. So we'll see what happens with redistricting. Okay, let's go to Congress. Most of you know these results, so I'll go over them quickly. In the House of Representatives, the Democrats damn near got wiped out. Not quite, thankfully, but it got close. There are 435 seats in the House. We had a margin of 232 to 197. So we had a 35 vote margin, the Democrats did, with 6 empty seats at the time, at the end, because of death and retirement. We lost many seats, and so that the margin was 10, and I believe now it's down to 9 with the most recent decision. There was 1 vacancy. It says currently 1 vacant. That's no longer true, but the Republican won. So I believe the margin may now be only 9, which is quite limited. So the Republicans are very, very optimistic that, given the usual pattern that in the off election, the election following a presidential election, so 2022, since the average turnover is as much as 20 to 25 seats, that they stand a very good chance of flipping the House. Part of why Biden is pushing so hard so quickly on a lot of his more progressive policies is because actually a lot of the infrastructure process and the relief measures are actually very popular with Republicans, not with Republican office holders, but in polling by rank and file Republicans. So, what you're seeing right now is we are deep already into the battle for the control of the House in 2022. And we will see how that goes, but it's certainly in jeopardy. In the Senate, while we're very pleased that we have a majority, the Democrats are, the results were actually disappointing. There were 23 Republican seats up. That's amazing. Under the Constitution, 1/3 of the seats are up every 2 years, so that they rotate. So it's unusual that you get 23 Republican seats up and only 12 Democratic seats up in this last election. But of those 23 seats, we managed to flip only 4. We had hoped to flip 6 or 8. We only got 4. On the other hand, the Republicans managed to flip 1 of the 12 Democratic seats. So we ended up with a net gain of 3, and that includes the results in Georgia, where we got 2 somewhat unexpectedly or thankfully or whatever. So before it was a margin of 53 to 47, we gained 3. So that left us with a 50-50 split, as we all know, and Kamala Harris gets to break the tie. Now, one thing that's important to understand is, and I won't go into this in too much detail, but we like to think of ourselves as a democratic country. And democratic countries mean 1 person, 1 vote, and democratic representation. When I took my students on comparative system study tours all over Europe, and they got into conversations with local students, professors, and we got into political discussions, and someone would mention democracy, the attitude in every single one of the European countries was, how dare you even talk to us about democracy? You're the least democratic of any major country. Are you kidding me? How can you claim to be democratic? You elect presidents who lose the popular vote, and they'd go on from there. Well, this is an example. Because of the two senators per state and the fact that we have small and large states, what's interesting is that the 50 Democratic senators represent 41 million more voters than the 50 Republican senators. How is that a democracy? Serious question. If we look at something which I think is important to many of us, which is the gender and ethnicity split within the Congress, this is the most diverse Congress ever in history. We have more women than we have ever had before. There will be 118, or there are 118 women who are voting members. There are also a couple that are non-voting members. DC has 2 non-voting members, and some of the territories have some non-voting members, but there are 118 voting members who are women. The split is pretty obvious: 89 Democratic women, 29 Republican women, so that there's far more Democrats. But this 118, it compares to 102 in the last Congress, which was the last record in the last Congress. So that's a big improvement. There'll be 24 women in the Senate. That's actually down 1 because Kamala Harris it was replaced by a man, obviously. And so we are down. We actually have 1 less woman in the Senate than we had before. Overall, the Senate, the Congress is 27% female, and that compares obviously to women being 51% of the population. So they have about half the representation they should have. If we compare this to many other countries, advanced liberal countries, whatever you want to call them, such as Norway and Denmark and what have you, the proportion of women is way, way smaller in the United States than in any of those countries. With regard to ethnicity, there's some interesting results, actually. About a quarter of the new Congress are racial or ethnic minorities. That's far and away the most racially and ethnically diverse in our history. 83% of those minorities, if you want to call it minorities, and I'll get into the use of that word in a minute, 83% are Democrats, only 17% are Republican. Non-Hispanic whites, and that's because many Hispanics consider themselves to be white, but non-Hispanic whites are about 60% of the US population and shrinking rapidly. They're 77% of Congress, so whites are clearly overrepresented. But interestingly, 13% of the Congress is now Black, and 1% is now Native American, and that's appropriate. That's interesting, because those are about the same percentages as they are in the population. So if we're talking about having a representation that is equal to your representation in the country, 13% Black and 1% Native American are about correct. On the other hand, there are only 9% Hispanics, whereas there's 19% Hispanics in the population, and 3% Asian American, whereas there's 6% Asian American in the population. So Hispanics and Asian Americans are underrepresented by about 50%. They have about half the representation you might expect if they were trying to get representation in Congress equal to their representation in the population as a whole. In the Senate, if we isolate that for a minute, the percentage of representation is much smaller. Only 11 out of the 100 are any racial or ethnic minorities in the Senate. So that's an increase of 2, but still quite low. And so the Senate is still literally a white man's club at this point still. The other thing I want to point out is, again, if we talk about democracy, we have a problem. Because of the way we count votes with the winner-take-all system, and because of the gerrymandering, the last big study that was done showed that while the party in control had only 1.2% more votes, they had almost 11% more representatives. That is, they had about 10%, the margin was 10% bigger in terms of the number of people as compared to the number of votes. So even in the House, which is supposed to be our democratically represented structure, because of game playing with gerrymandering and a winner-take-all system, that doesn't work. Winner-take-all meaning you could get 49%, let's say, Black votes in 2 or 3 districts, and they would get no seats at all, because winner takes all. Somebody got 51%, so the 49% have no representation. Unlike many democratic countries, which have at least a major portion of their representation in their equivalent of our House is proportional representation. And if someone has 25%, some group has 25% of the vote, they get 25% of the seats. And that does not happen in the US. So even the House is not really very democratic. Okay, then let's go to the presidential one. And here I think we all are, I think, as Democrats, very happy that Biden won. But I think you're going to be a little shocked by what are some of the conditions under which he won. First of all, to take the top line, so to speak, Biden got 306 electoral votes in 25 states, plus DC, which has 3 electoral votes, and Trump got 232, also in 25 states. So it was a 25-25 split in the states. And the total number of electoral votes was exactly the same as in 2016, just with the reverse by party. But as we all know, the electoral votes do not represent one person, one vote, even remotely. And again, this is a function of the way the Senate's constructed. Since the number of electoral votes you get for each state is the number of House representatives plus the number of senators, and since even very tiny states get two senators, you get a disproportionality between the votes and the representation. So that in Wyoming, for example, every electoral vote represents 175, every electoral vote in the Electoral College for president represents 175,000 citizens voting for that person. Whereas in California, it takes 750,000 votes to get one electoral vote. So the electoral votes, the idea that, and Europeans look at this and say, are you kidding me? How you're saying you have two people, both the Electoral College, both get one vote for president. Those votes are equal weighted for president, but there's 175,000 citizens behind one and 750,000 behind the other. And you're calling that a democracy? Are you kidding me? And there's no answer to that. It's not a democracy. It's not one person, one vote, even remotely. Okay. Now let's talk about the popular vote. Back in 2016, while Trump won the electoral vote, obviously Hillary won the popular vote. I said that was more than 3 million, but actually I believe it's close to 2.8, 2.9 million votes. So it's almost 3 million that Hillary won. And of course, she lost the election. That's the 5th time in American history that that's happened. And the time before that was Gore versus Bush. Even if you forget about Florida and the Supreme Court acting in what I would consider totally illegally, since the Constitution gives these matters specifically to the states, for the Supreme Court to have stepped in and blocked the recounting of votes is, to my mind, blatantly unconstitutional. And the fact that they did it with the Republicans voting yes and the Democrats voting no made it a very partisan issue. So again, how democratic that is an interesting question. But at any rate, even if you ignore Florida, Gore won more than 500,000 more votes than Bush did. Than Bush did. So this was another case where the electoral votes and the popular vote don't match. However, that was not true in 2020. Biden won 81 million votes. Trump won 74 million. Now let's be clear. 74 million is the most votes that any presidential candidate has ever received in American history, except for Biden. 74 million people voted for Trump. Now that means if and we know how it happened. He flipped Arizona, he being Biden, flipped Georgia, and won Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, and that provided the margin of victory. Overall, it was 7,052,000 votes more that Biden got than Bush. Now, remember that number. We're going to come back to that. That's an important number. What is also important is that the voter turnout was the highest we've had since 1900. So in 120 years, a larger percentage of the American people voted than have voted in the last 120 years. So this was a major, major turnout of people who voted, some 66%. Now, despite that vote differential, that is actually rather deceptive. Because if you look at California, Biden won by 11,100,000 votes. Trump won by 6 million votes. The difference between them in California is over 5 million votes, 5,100,000. In New York, Biden won by 5,200,000. Didn't win one. He got 5,200,000. Trump got 3,200,000. So the margin was just about 200 million, about 2 million. If you add the margin in California to the margin in New York, you come out with 7,096,000. But oops, the margin nationally was 7,052,000. That is, the margin in California and New York was about 44,000 more than the national margin, which means Trump won the rest of the country by 44,000 votes. He won. Outside of New York and California, he had 44,000 more votes than did Biden. Now, given the way they were scattered between states, and how the margin in each state, how close some states was, Biden clearly did win, but on the electoral votes. But nevertheless, if you talk about a close election, this was nothing like a sweep. This was no major victory by Biden. That didn't happen. And we'll talk more about that. Now, another way of looking at this, which very few people have bothered doing, is here. The United States has 3,139 counties. We tend to talk about states, but counties really play a particular role when looking at where people live and where they vote and the politics and the cultural patterns and the ethnic divisions in the United States. Biden won a grand total of 551. That's all, folks. Trump won 2,588 counties. I mean, almost a 5-to-1 margin. The vast majority. It's not even fair to call it a majority. About 80% of all the counties in the United States voted for Trump. When you color a map, as everyone by now has seen, the vast majority of the map is red, not blue. And that has implications that are absolutely catastrophic, potentially, for the future of this country. Because these counties are, for all practical purposes, make up two different countries. They are so different as to be remarkable to even contain them within a single nation. 71% of the total GDP, gross domestic product, the dollar value of everything produced, all goods and services produced in the United States, 71% of the goods and services produced in the United States are produced in those 551 counties. Only 29% is produced in the GOP counties. The 5 most productive counties in the United States, LA, New York, Cook, which is Chicago, Harris, which is Houston, and Santa Clara, were all Democratic. But that's much more than that. It's not just economic power. The counties that voted for Biden are more ethnically diverse, they're better educated, and they're much more white-collar professional. The aggregate non-white population, if we count Hispanics as non-white, the aggregate non-white population is about 35% in those 551 counties. That is 1/3, more than 1/3 of all the people in those counties are not white. That's not what the rest of the country looks like. More than that, 36% of those counties have a college education. That's remarkable. In fact, 64% of all college graduates in the country, 2/3, 2 out of every 3 people who have graduated from college live in one of those 551 counties. On the other hand, 62%, virtually 2/3 of the people who never even finished high school, I'm not talking about college, they never finished high school, live in the other 2,500 counties. So you've got one set of counties producing 3/4 of the GDP, 2/3 of all the college graduates, compared to these other counties with very little production spread among 2,500 counties, sharing this 29% of the GDP, with only 1/3 of the college graduates among all 2,500 counties, but 2/3 of the people who never finished high school. These are different worlds. These are totally different worlds. It's hard to call them one country. If you look at the ethnic division, it's also very vivid. The whites, interestingly, split 50-50. Half of the whites are in those 2,500 counties. Half of the whites are in the 500 counties. But of people who on the census consider themselves multiracial, 2/3 of them, 65%, are in the 500 counties. 74% of all Blacks, we think of a lot of the Black population as rural. That's not true anymore. 74% of the Black population is in those 551 counties. 77% of the Latinos, 86% of Asian Americans, and 83% of people who are foreign born but are now citizens live in those 500 counties. If you take one minus that, that is, if 77% of our Latino or Hispanic, 23% are in the other counties, the percentage of all these non-white populations that are spread between 2,500 other counties is minuscule. A white person can grow up in many of these other counties and never, ever see a Black person in their entire life. Hardly ever see a Hispanic. Now, that's not true in every place. There are large Hispanic populations in certain areas. I mean, there are large Asian populations in Louisiana for various reasons, including shrimp fishing and what have you. And there are large Hispanic populations in some of the Midwestern states at the poultry factories and the slaughterhouses. So there are pockets. But the fact that there are some pockets means that the other counties never see these people. They never experience them. They certainly never see a Black policeman. They certainly never have seen a Black mayor. They probably have never seen a Black teacher. Their experience of life is not what it is in the 500 urban centers. It really is a different world. And we have to understand that. Trump did. Trump appealed to that. That's where the white supremacy comes from. They're desperate. I'll come back to that in a minute. I want to look at this in a slightly different way first for that. This paragraph comes from the U.S. Census Population Bureau, Brookings and Pew. And it's an important thing because this talks about the future. From 2000 to 2018, the non-Hispanic white population fell below 50%. So the whites, so-called whites, became a minority in 138 counties in just that 8-year period. And these were scattered from coast to coast, from the Caribbean to the Canadian border. They joined 155 counties that were already primarily not white. And that meant that you had 293 counties, and almost every one of them are part of the 551 that voted for Biden. But 293 counties in which non-Hispanic whites, European descended whites, so to speak, represented a minority of the population. That's about 10% of US counties. 6 states that voted in 2020 were predominantly not white. Hawaii, which has always been predominantly not white, New Mexico, California, Texas, Nevada, and Maryland. District of Columbia, of course, has been for decades. We estimate that 4 more states will become predominantly non-white just by the end of this decade, in the 2020s, by 2029, 2030. And that includes Arizona, Florida, Georgia, and New Jersey. Some people find New Jersey interesting to be on that list, but so is Maryland on that list. That was already true. To think about that a little bit more, by 2045, which is not far away, the US as a nation will be majority minority. White European descended people will be less than 50% of the American population for the whole country by 2045. By 2060, which is also not that far away, 22 states, that list that's 10 now, or it's 6 now and 10 by the end of the decade, that will be increased to 22 states. But it's more important than the 22, because those states will account for 66% of all the Americans in the country. 2/3 of all the Americans, of everybody who's an American, will live in one of those 22 states. The other states are the small population states. So 2/3 of the American population is going to live in states in which the whites are in the minority, or at least maybe a plurality, but not 50%. And they're beginning to know that because they're being told it. This is not a surprise. This may be more of a surprise to us in the urban areas than it is to them, because the Republicans and the Trump people have been telling them this. What was the chant in Charleston? They will not replace us. Well, they will. They will replace them. If whites are used to being in control because they're in the majority, if we have a democracy and majority rules, then the white folks in this country are going to have to get used to having black policemen and black mayors and Hispanic this and Asian that. The idea that they have grown up for 200 years simply assuming that whites are in the majority, and if elections work, they should win most of the time. And they believe that. And when they see that not happening, and they see that, my God, it's not going to be true for the entire country, and somebody tells them, you're losing your country, in one sense, they're right. And the question is, how do we deal with that? How do we deal with that in the sense of making sure people are willing to accept it? We have a generation of people in the 500 counties, where most of the multinationalism is, most of the ethnic minorities are now, who are used to seeing each other. They're used to going to schools with people of different colors. They're used to an environment in which families go out to each other's cultures for dinner. You know, you go have Thai food, or you go have Southern this, or you go have that. They're used to that world. And we have people where that doesn't happen. Just never happens. Now, one of the issues is, why has this happened? And in terms of the changing population. And it's really 3 things. And that's rather interesting. One is differential birth rates. The birth rate among whites, it takes basically 1.3 or so babies per woman to replicate the population, for population stability. You have less than that, the population shrinks. You have more than that, the population grows. Well, the number of children per woman isn't 1.2, 1.3, it's 0.7. White women are going to school They're getting educated. They're having jobs. They're professionals. And a significant proportion of them don't want children, or they don't want more than one child. So the birth rate, the white population in this country is shrinking. Forget anything else. It's shrinking because there aren't enough white babies. Now, I'm not saying it should be or there shouldn't be. I have no problem with this, but the point is that's part of it. By the way, the Black population is shrinking. It's not growing. The Hispanic population and the Asian populations are growing, and that's part of the difference. And then we have an obvious problem. White people are dying. I mean, given that most of the population's white and older people tend to die before younger people, big surprise. A higher proportion of people dying are white than are Black or Hispanic. So it's both, it's both the birth rates as well as the death rates that are leading to a shrinking white population in total, but also in comparison. And finally, you do have immigration, but quite frankly, that's not the major problem. That's not the major issue. I won't call it a problem, but it's not the major issue. Now, one result of this is what I've said, and I won't bother reading this paragraph. It's that there have been study after study now done about the life experience of people growing up in these predominantly white rural areas compared to the multi-ethnic urban areas and the areas surrounding them. And it's very different. It's a very different thing. And even in California, where we talk about, that, Biden got 11 million votes, but nevertheless, Trump got 6 million votes. And all those propositions failed. And the division in California is the same as it is in the country. The Central Valley and the North, with the exception of Hispanics working in the fields in the Central Valley, but the multi-ethnic populations are very divided. No matter how poor you are, if you are Black and you're living in the cities, and someone says to you, hey, you're unemployed, you don't have any money, why don't you go get a job on the farms? Go pick strawberries, go pick this. That smells like slavery. That smells like, the period after Jim Crow. It's never going to happen. The Black population is never, ever moving to rural areas and engaging in rural work. It's not going to happen. No possibility. Those are different worlds. Bakersfield is not Los Angeles. Fresno is not Los Angeles. The far north is not Los Angeles. And, we're about to see a test of that. And the test is going to be the recall of Knudsen. Watch who votes for who and where the votes come from. Now, at the same time as that's happening, and that is a substantial part of why we have this whole issue of white supremacy raising its head so vigorously, what's fascinating is that when you talk about the population as a whole, you have an astounding consensus, at least what the polls show us. By consensus, I mean overwhelming votes in the order of matter of 60, 70%, who support most or all of these. Taking climate change seriously, expanding Social Security, providing health insurance for all one way or another, providing a job guarantee program, tuition-free public colleges. My God, join the rest of the educated world and we not only charge our kids tuition to go to college, we make them go into debt to go to college. That's insane. I mean, from an economic standpoint, it's just insane. You want your kids to come out of college and start jobs and start families and buy a house and buy a car. And what do? You put them in a situation where they have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt. My daughter and her wife each are carrying $150,000 in debt from college. Now, not from college. In both cases, they got out of college without a penny. That's the price of a master's degree, right? expanded food support programs. It's unbelievable. How do you have a modern country and we have a significant part of our population that has food insecurity? That's our cute name for it, food insecurity. Do you know that even before the COVID thing, every UC campus and every CSU campus had a food program that students could come and pick up free food on campus? Our students were starving. They did not have enough to eat. That's, and you're charging them tuition, forget about it. I mean, it's mind-boggling, just mind-boggling. And then the $15 minimum wage. Okay, the last thing I want to do, and I'm not going to read this to you. By the way, Mike just sent out to everybody on the mailing list these notes. So you all have a copy of them and you can look at your leisure. This is a study that was done in November after the election and then updated in December. It's a study from the Brookings Institute by 4 people there. And I've simply copied their closing paragraphs of the study. It's about a 30-40 page study. And the title of it's there. It's Biden voting counties equal to, 70% of American GDP, which is what we're talking about. I'll just look at a couple of places I've underlined. What they're saying is that the difference between the Democrats and the Republicans is that given that the Republican base is in these 2,500 counties, it is appropriate in a democracy that their policies serve the needs of those 2,500 counties. And given that they are having trouble winning ever in the 500 counties, why would they worry about policies that concern the 500 counties? That's not their base. So if democracy works the way it's supposed to, big surprise. So the Democratic Party tends to prioritize housing affordability, improve social safety net, transportation infrastructure, racial justice, all these good things. Republicans don't give a damn. Why should they? Because those are not the issues that face their base. The nation's struggling small towns and rural areas, prosperity is almost out of reach. So the question is, how do we address the needs of those areas? We're not going to make inroads into those 2,500 counties if we don't. If we're going to say they're Americans too, their needs are our needs, we have to address the needs of those other 2,500 counties, then there's a range of issues we have to start talking about that we're not addressing. One of which, by the way, would be free college. I'm serious. You're going to tell the younger generation from those areas, you can't get a good life, you can't get a good job without a college education, and then it's not there. The campuses aren't close, and if they were, they couldn't afford them anyhow. That makes no sense. That's a self-destructive policy for the country. Anyhow. And what they're pointing out is that when you get a candidate like Trump, who promised not to build up all parts of the country, but rather to vilify groups that didn't resemble his base, that was absolutely a rational approach, and it worked. His campaign worked. He had more votes outside of California and New York than Biden did. His campaign was a success. He won in 5 times more counties. That's got to be viewed as pretty successful. The fact that he lost the election is real, but in many ways, that's not true. And what they're pointing out is, with this, if we keep up with this, what we're doing now, this is a recipe for more gridlock and inefficiency, and for economic harm to nearly everybody. Because we're complaining about gridlock. Biden comes out and proposes all these programs, and they make sense, and the country as a whole needs them. But if the Republicans are going to oppose the infrastructure sort of projects and all the rest of it, childcare, preschool, sick leave, the whole range, it undercuts the entire country if we can't get those sorts of policies through. And, there's going to have to be some trade-offs. If we can't get broadband to every home in the country, 5G broadband to every home in the country, it's as important as electricity and telephone service, and it should be free. It won't be, not in America, but it should be. If we can't get adequate health care to everybody, why should we expect their support? I mean, think about it. I mean, in a different talk, I mentioned, and I'm almost done now, Roosevelt's economic Bill of Rights. That goes back to 1941. And Roosevelt was arguing that part of the economic Bill of Rights, without which we cannot have a viable country, is we have to guarantee to everyone a well-paying job. We have to guarantee to everyone a good education. We have to guarantee to everyone adequate housing. We have to guarantee to everyone adequate health care. And we're not. We're just not. And the results of COVID in terms of who's dying and the proportion of Blacks and Hispanics who are dying of COVID compared to whites is startling. And it's evidence of the nature of our healthcare system. So we have a lot of work to do. And with that, I'll stop.
So let's
Questions,
give Andy
comments?
a big hand and a big thanks to Andy. In the interest of time, I think we should segue straight to some questions for Andy.
Right.
Before we begin, I just want to point out, if you go to the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, there's a little happy face that says reactions. If you click on that reactions icon, you could click raise hand like I just did, and your hand will be raised. And then that way we can get a cue and not talk over one another. I'm going to drop in the background and let Andy field his own questions, but I wanted to give everybody that short little tutorial first. So I'm going to lower my hand.
So raise a hand or unmute yourself. And first of all, make sure you, the lower left-hand corner is the little mute thing. Make sure you unmute yourself and raise a hand or just wave
So
or something.
Joe Lyons has his hand up. Joe, how about if you ask Andy's first question, then Andy, you can
Right.
take him after that.
Yeah, I was taken by one of your kind of closing comments, and it was, of course, it won't happen in America. And it seems to me that, in addition to the fact that we have this divide, that the divide is based, as you suggest, on a political calculation that the Senate can be controlled the easiest, and it is. And it can create gridlock. Do you think that the base of the Republican Party is in a real way made better off by Republican policy that establishes gridlock as opposed to functionality?
No, I don't. But I'm not sure they believe that. I
Yeah,
mean, that there's a question. I think the objective answer is no, because I think a lot of the Democratic proposals would in fact improve their lives as well.
Yes.
And I think Biden, I must say, so far I'm more positively impressed with Biden than I expected to be, and I think he's aware of what we just talked about quite vividly, and is looking for programs that really will benefit the rural areas and the smaller areas as well. But do they perceive that? And I'm not sure they do. And Trump and the others have succeeded in vilifying the Democrats to a very large degree. I mean, what I find amazing is the contradiction between what happens when you ask folks about a particular policy issue as opposed to when you ask them about parties or particular bills. And so, I think the part of the question is going to be selling this stuff. Obama was a terrible salesman. I mean, he just wasn't very good at it. And he gave great prepared speeches, but he wasn't much of a salesman. Biden seems to be a little bit better, and he may just be able to break this gridlock. But I must say, if he doesn't get around the filibuster, we're dead meat.
If I could have one follow-up question on this, and that is the impact of, I guess, what is referred to as our capitalistic free market system, which is probably not necessarily a free market, but excusing the misuse of that word in the context that the capitalists would have us believe. How distorted has the possibility of significant change in this kind of divide become because of the ability of money from the business marketplace sector affecting attitudes that, as you just mentioned, they think they're better off when in fact they are not any better off, and in fact they might be worse off. And yet the financial base of the party is certainly much, much, much better off by being able to, again, control media in a way that allows or convinces that bigger part of their base that they're better off. How pernicious has the destruction of the democratic process become by the marriage of business and our government?
Well, I think it's serious, obviously. And I'll mention one thing in particular. The fact that we have gone from a solid 40, 50% union membership to 6.7%.
Yeah.
6.7% of the private sector. Now, it's a little higher in the public sector. Do the teachers and government workers, they're about 25, 30%. But in the private sector, we're down to less than 10% of the population's workers are unionized. And the unions played a critical role in terms of education, and there's
Yes.
calling out the managers and the bureaucrats and what have you. And there's nobody doing that. And the workers, for the most part, I mean, while there was tension and there was some corruption and all the rest of it, but for the most part, I think the workers who had some voice of electing their union reps trusted them, and at least they had an alternative voice. And that voice is gone.
Yep.
His voice is gone. And what happened at the Arizona, the Amazon plant in Bessemer, Alabama, is a perfect example of that.
Yep.
Who next? Just sound off or wave a hand or whatever you like. Oh, there we go. Okay, Dorothy, go ahead. But unmute yourself. You're muted. Lower left-hand corner. There you go.
Very much. I don't know if I was actually next or not, but thank you so much for your presentation. I thought it was a very elegant analysis. And the only thing I would add to it is that it seems like leadership really, really matters. And individual events really, really make a difference. For example, we all know that the sole agenda of the Republican Party is to transfer wealth into the hands of the people who already have most of it, and little deregulation and permission to monopolize for big business. And that's pretty much what they want to do. But they've had to more or less systematically, since I guess Lewis Powell announced it in his memo in whenever that was, 71 or 2, they had to organize in order to achieve those objectives at a level never before seen, I don't think, in American politics. And we're just beginning to do that 60 years later. It's terrifying that they've managed to gain this level of power at all levels of government, when what they want to do should be considered anathema by most of the people who live in the country. The Occupy movement pretty much underscored that, and yet it went away, and its potential to affect rural voters seems like it was terribly limited. And now we have a culture of leadership which is so repulsive that Trump and his fellows can literally insult their own followers by saying how much they love the low information voter and similar things, and they don't even notice. So I don't know
Well,
what kind of question that is, but.
You're saying two different things in a way. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, you're saying two different things in a way, and one is that they've, have done a magnificent job of reaching out and building a base, and the other, they've done it in a way that insults people. I want to make one point that I didn't get into. There is strong evidence that parts of the Republican Party have been working very hard within the Hispanic community, that they know it's the fastest growing community. They know it's by far and away the largest, quote, minority for the moment. And what happened in Florida and what happened in Texas is not an accident. They have really been organizing and working in those communities. And to be very blunt, I mean, the Hispanic community is mostly Catholic. It's anti-gay. It's anti-abortion. It's used to a certain amount of authoritarianism. The Catholic Church is not a very democratic institution in itself. And I don't want to get into a big fight about religion, but they see fertile ground there, and they're right. And what's interesting is in the Rio Grande Valley, Biden lost, and it's almost all Hispanic. And in major parts of Florida, which is Hispanic, he lost. And if the Democratic Party doesn't really address the needs of the Hispanic community throughout the country, we're dead meat. Because, I mean, the Black population, while it's significant and it's mostly loyal, especially the women, it's 13% of the population. 19% is already Hispanic, and the Black population is shrinking and the Hispanic population is growing. The future lies with the Hispanic population. End of discussion. And we're going to have to really work within that community. No question about it. And their social inclinations are conservative, not liberal. So
We have time for one last question.
Sorry I went on so long. Oh, there we go. Jim Klein, Keith?
So
I see your
have
hand.
you assembled a list of the things that Democrats are doing? You mentioned a couple that are driving voters away, which maybe we should recognize and stop doing. Now, some of them we don't want to stop doing because it's so important to us, but are there other things that, to be realistic, we really should stop chasing voters away?
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, if you look at that list of things, whether it's education or healthcare or what have you, I think those are not chasing people away. I think one of the issues which has become very controversial is the question of racial criminal justice or racialized criminal justice. The defund police is a catastrophe as a motto, but the idea of controlling the police, of rationalizing the police, whatever you want to say, I mean, what was that? I saw a figure that today we've had something like 100 police shootings in the last 6 weeks. I mean, there's no country in the world, no democratic country in the world that has 100 police shootings. I don't care what color the victim is. How do you have a country where 100 people get shot by the police in 6 weeks? That's insane. We've raised, largely raised at least one Black child, and we have anyhow, I don't know if it's possible to understand that when a mother watches a Black son get dressed and go to school, every Black mother in the United States is terrified, period. Because they know there's a very good chance that if that Black kid experiences a white policeman between the home and the school, he's likely to be dead. Simple as that. And that's got to stop. And if that isn't a priority in this country, nothing else is worthwhile, really. If that isn't a priority, we're doomed. And so the question is, so while I understand that, one could say defund the police is a bad motto, and it is, it's a terrible motto. But reforming the police, remodifying, that sort of thing, we have to be careful of our language, I guess is my point. But we don't necessarily have to walk away from some of these issues.
Okay, Andy, thanks very much. Let's conclude on that note. We certainly have a lot more that we could say in following up all the issues that Andy raised tonight. But at this point, I think we should turn things over to Sam, and who will lead us through the next part of our meeting where we have a lot of business to take care of. Thanks again, Andy.
Thank you all. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you, Chris. All right, folks, as Chris said, we do have a lot of the agenda. The first business item is the approval of the agenda. Hopefully everyone has received that via email. Is there a motion to approve the agenda for tonight?
So move.
Second.
Motion second, and without objection, so ordered. All right, here we go. I can see everybody. Okay, and the minutes for March 29th as well, those were emailed previously. Is there a motion to see
I
Carol?
move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Cool, thank you. And without objection, so ordered with those two. All right, and for the reports tonight, I'm gonna ask everyone if they could just bring up the highlights. We'll start off with Carol as a treasurer. The highlight is that we have money.
We have money. Our money is, the bank shows more, but we have some checks outstanding and our balance is about 7,500 right now.
Cool. Any questions for Carol, treasurer? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to Chris, VP of Programs.
Yeah, I'll be very brief. We've got two good talks coming up. On May 14th, we have Janice Elliott, who's a Upland City Council person, and her talk will be Upland and Claremont, Opportunities and Challenges. It'll give us an opportunity to see what our neighbors are doing and give us some local perspectives, seeing how some other localities are approaching the issues that concern them. Then on May 31st, yes, that is Memorial Day, we're going to have Senator Connie Leyva, State Senator Connie Leyva.
Cool.
Okay, so those are next up. Janice Elliott, City Council person for Upland on the 14th, and State Senator Connie Leyva on the 31st. Turn it back over to you, Sam.
Thank you, and a list of all the other upcoming programs are at the very end of the agenda as well. All right, VP of Membership, Andy, what's the latest with the membership? I know we're
No change since the last meeting that I know of. Carol, have you gotten any word, any new one?
I didn't pick up this email until late, but yes, we do have a new member. Oh my God, a doctor. Oh my Lord. I printed it, but where did I put it? Anyway, we did have one new member, and so I've sent him a letter, and hopefully we'll catch up with him soon. He obviously didn't make it to the meeting, or we wouldn't know.
Send me a note and I'll have it on my list.
Alex, somebody.
Okay.
And corresponding secretary report, Mike?
Mike, you're
muted.
You can unmute here.
Gotta unmute, Mike.
There we go. Sorry. Thank you. Yeah, the only thing I have to report is I think that we sent a letter to Judy Chu, thanking her for being one of the original co-sponsors of the Energy Initiative and Carbon Dividend Act of 2021, HR 2307. So it's happy to get that off. That's basically all I have for tonight.
Thanks, Mike. And we're going to be talking about that under new business in just a bit. And for issues and Maurice, Merrill.
Okay, well, I'm going to skip most of the issues, but except one thing, Sam. Could you say something about the city council meeting tomorrow night?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was kind of saving my report.
Oh, okay, then we'll wait for you.
No,
Okay,
that's okay.
go ahead.
And Debbie isn't here for the political strategy report. Did anyone have any?
No, I want to say just just a reminder, my second role, the Voorhees Voice is coming along. It shall be out on the 1st.
Cool. Thank you, Merrill.
Yeah, if I may, one other issue is I really think we as a club are going to have to come determine, I think you're going to get into it on the housing issue of where we stand and how, there's going to be, there's a whole series, there's at least 3 pending issues in the city, and there's going to be more. And I think we're going to need to sort of identify what criteria we're going to use and what we support and what we don't support, and whether we get involved with housing.
And to that point, first, I want to acknowledge my former colleague, Joe Lyons, in the room, and Karen Rosenthal is also here. And, I just wrote a letter to the current councils, letting them know that, they have a lot of pretty heavy housing issues before them, and probably more so than we all had our fair share of being on the council. But I think they have more than that. At any rate, Andy's actually is very, very correct in that we are planning as a club to have more of a housing discussion, because it is something that is coming up over and over again. However, for tomorrow's council, they have an appeal of the Architectural Commission for the Commons, and our club did not discuss it. So we are sending an invite or a reminder to the club membership, just letting them know that if they want to express their viewpoints and their support or approval or disapproval to join in the at tomorrow night's council meeting and let the council know their position. But as Andy said, we will be discussing that as a club to really have more of a solid position from the Democratic Club to make sure that the council is aware. And to that point, kudos to the executive committee. We've been meeting several Saturday mornings now to go over the bylaws and really perform an entire analysis of where the club is at. And little by little, we're bringing it to the membership as we digest it. And so we have some of those items for your approval tonight, but there's more to come as we go through it, including the endorsement process and several bylaw recommendations, and even some of the changes to the membership dues. So there's a lot of that's coming up, and we're giving it to you guys in bite-sized fashion. So there's some for tonight. Are there any questions or added comments? All right.
Yeah, Sam, if time permits at the end, I'd like to say something about the housing issue, but at this point, I think we need to move the agenda. So I'm going to just keep quiet until the end.
Okay, sounds good. All right, with that, let's just jump into our new business. And as was pointed out, John Forney isn't here tonight, but we do have HR 2307, the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Trust Fund, which our Congresswoman is a co-sponsor. And we did discuss it at the executive committee with the recommendation of support. And so we're now asking the club for a position of support for HR 2307. However, I'm not sure if anyone wanted to speak to that item. Was there someone on the?
Sam?
Yes.
I'm going through my emails and I can't find the agenda anywhere or this language anywhere. It would be a kindness if someone has this information and can just project it on the screen.
I don't. I just have our.
Let's see. Let's see where. Let's see. Let me put this up to all right. Can everyone see that?
Yes.
So this is the let's see, you wanted to see there's no summary as of yet, but which part did you want to see?
No, I'm sorry, this is great what you have up, but it was not what I was requesting. I was just requesting the agenda. I found it, but
I'm sorry.
it's,
I do have the agenda as well.
Sam, I have a question on this. This is similar or maybe the same as the California Carbon Dividend Trust Fund. Am I correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And yeah, this has been introduced in Congress before. I think this is the third time that it came before Congress. Let's see.
Sam,
Yes.
what is it exactly that we're doing here?
So so this was John wanted us to take a support position for
Oh,
HR 2307.
HR 2307, is that
Correct.
correct? That's what John wanted?
Correct.
Okay, so I will make a motion that the Democratic Club of Claremont offers its support for HR 2307.
I second.
Right, is there discussion on this? I know I don't have except for like what we know from online. See, Don?
I just want to point out as a reminder that the board did send Judy Chu a letter thanking her for supporting this. So this is not the same thing as the board has already done.
Correct.
It-
Don, you had a question?
HR 2307 is the Energy Innovation Carbon Dividend Act that the Citizens Climate Lobby has been trying to get passed for the past decade or so. Yeah, it's the Citizens Climate Lobby is, in big support of this. If that makes any difference to anyone, I'm on Citizens Climate Lobby, so I know something about it. And last year it was a different number, but it's basically the same House resolution as last year.
I do not believe it was brought to the club for support last year. So this is something new, a new request for the club.
Okay, does everyone understand what what it's about? I can talk on it a little bit.
Go ahead.
Okay. How this would work is a company that takes carbon out of the ground, oil, gas, coal. They would have to pay a fee per ton of carbon. Those fees would go to a fund which would distribute the money out equally amongst all consumers. As a consumer of carbon fuels, you would get a dividend check. That dividend check would help you pay for the increased prices, but no one's telling you how to spend that dividend check. You could buy jet fuel with it if you wanted, or you could buy a Tesla and never have to buy gasoline again. You could put solar panels on your roof and never have to pay for carbon, electricity from carbon. And the hope is that as the price of carbon goes up, its use will go down. Less carbon burned means less carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which is good for combating global warming. And that's the whole idea of the HR 2307.
In other words, it's a market-based solution, not a prohibition against fossil fuels.
That is correct. It's not a tax. They're not taxing carbon. It's a fee, and that fee will be spent on dividend checks, and the dividend checks will go to all consumers. This thing is projected to be very good for poor people. Poorer people have smaller carbon footprints. They don't fly across the country. So, so this will be good for them.
So the recommendation from the executive committee was to support.
Right.
Were there any other comments? I can't see everybody, but it looks like if we're ready to vote, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
All right, sounds like the ayes have it, and we'll go ahead and express the club's support for HR 2307.
Will this be a letter, a further letter to Judy Chu, or what's the means for expressing our support?
I think that we would be listed as one of the supporters on the bill, so I think we would
Okay.
be able to send a letter to is it Congressman Doach from Florida, which is
Okay.
kind of interesting. All right, the next item on the under new business is an endorsement for Hilda Solis is running for re-election for the County Supervisor District 1. We did discuss it at the executive committee. Now, this is one of those items that we haven't finalized how we're going to go through the endorsement process for the local races for city council and school board. But this was one that the argument was, well, there's, who's really going to challenge her, and it could, put us in good position to be an early supporter for her, since likely.
I move that the club support endorse Hilda Solis for county supervisor for re-election.
Is there a second for discussion?
I'll second.
Sam, may I,
Yes.
you said this, but I just want to point out that we're likely as a club to get some benefits from this early endorsement. Is that correct?
Correct.
What would they be? She might come out and speak to us.
Yeah, no, it's good. I mean, I think the discussion that we had was, unless Barack Obama runs, who really is going to challenge her? I think with the county supervisors, it's one of those positions where they're in for their entire term, unless it's very hard to run against an incumbent. But in fact, for those that follow the county government, there was Sheila Kuehl decided not to run again, and so that one is going to be there's going to be a lot of people throwing their hat in for that one. So that's West Side stuff. But with Solis, she's I don't know of anyone who would want to go up against her. So yeah, I think that it definitely won't hurt us. Is there any other comments on this item? If not, all those in favor of endorsing Hilda Solis for County Supervisor District 1, say aye.
Aye.
Oppose? All right, the ayes have it. And again, we'll send her a letter and let her office know. All right, the next item, hopefully, Chris, if you're sharing the screen, you could put it down to the executive committee did discuss AB 1416, which is on the screen there. Is there a motion to discuss this?
I so move.
Okay,
Second.
All right. So this is an item that we've been taking a lot more active role in taking positions and on bills. So this is these next couple of ones are definitely ones that do affect campaigning. So Was there someone who wanted to speak to this one?
Just briefly, it's clearly about transparency of statewide measures. I mean, identifying the people who are behind these things is really important.
A question from Joe.
Yes.
Would this include the PAX money and other kind of anonymous sources, at least by name?
I think that's the intent.
Right.
Okay, so that is the, okay.
Ballot arguments printed in the state voter information cards.
All right. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, is there a motion to take a support position of 1416?
I move.
Second.
All right. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, very good. And SB 90, very similar. I think this is the one that that Senator Newman was pushing.
And got himself kicked out of office. Anyway, it's exactly the same as the AB 1416. So I move we accept SB 90, support it.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Any discussion or comments on SB 90? All right, seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Oppose? All right, seeing none. Support for SB 90 also passes. All right, so as mentioned, we do have, we did, as an executive committee, did discuss the endorsement in local nonpartisan offices, including the council, city council, school board, and community college. And this was called into question because we, at the last endorsement or the last races, now that everything got pushed into November, we were considering not taking a position, but now we wanted to make it official for to make sure that the club does take an active role in the endorsement. I guess first we should ask for a motion to discuss the recommendation from the executive committee to continue to endorse in local nonpartisan offices.
So moved.
Okay.
Sam, are you going to be, you want to vote on this as a whole and discuss as a whole? Or do you want to go down point by point?
Well, I
Yeah.
think we could first have a first hear the motion in a second, and then we could have discussion on that. So yes.
You have, Sam, you have to move the screen because we can't read the bottom.
I'm going to move that the club accept this recommendation from the executive committee, and then we can discuss the items on there. What's your amendment?
So Merrill and Karen, if I may, Karen, I believe that you are referring to Article 10, which is under the
Yes.
item approval of the DCC bylaws proposed changes.
Right.
We're 2 items above that right now, but I can move the screen a little bit and I'll do that.
Oh, well, because aren't these, isn't Article 10 related to approval of the recommendation that the DCC will continue to endorse in local nonpartisan offices?
Yes.
How we will endorse? So I'm just,
That's a fair point, Karen. I guess Article 10, the last item, presupposes approval of the item two above it. So you're
So-
correct there.
maybe you should discuss the approval of the recommendation the DCC will endorse in ADEM elections, and then go into approval of the bylaws, and then approval of the recommendation that will continue to endorse in local nonpartisan offices.
Okay, fair enough, but we do have a motion that's on the floor
Right.
that's been proposed, firsted, and we need a second. But if your proposal is to ask me to withdraw so that we can consider them in that order, sure, I'll withdraw. And if there's unanimous consent, we can proceed to the next item as you recommend.
So the first one would be to the approval of recommendation for the ADEM elections.
Right. Correct.
Is there a motion to discuss that?
I so
would-
move.
Okay, and second.
Second.
Cool. So is there any discussion or comments on that? I'll just add real quick. Again, this was one where we have endorsed in the ADEM elections, and we've been pretty responsive on that. But I think this time what we want to do as a club is make sure we have it in a procedure way. We're putting together a calendar to make sure that we're not, letting anything fall through the cracks when it comes to being on time for these elections and having plenty of time for a review of all the candidates. Any other discussion or points on this item?
Well, so are we assuming that this has been moved and seconded?
Yes.
Is that, okay.
Carol Lee, did you catch that?
Yes, thank you.
Any other discussion? So let's go ahead and take a vote on the item to approve the recommendation from the executive committee for that the club will endorse in the ADEM elections. All those in favor say aye.
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 Oppose? All right, ayes have it. So then we'll go on then to the second item, which will be the bylaws changes, Article 10. So those are the ones you see on the screen there.
Sam, if I may,
3?
I think the proposed order was just to switch the ADEM with the item
Yeah.
above it.
Yeah.
And so we do the item above it now, and then after that, we do Article 10.
Oh, the
Is that
non-
correct, Karen? That was your recommendation?
Yes, that was my recommendation.
Okay, got it. So there was no motion yet on that anyway, so thank you for catching that.
I'll move approval of the one above, which is that we'll continue to endorse.
Nonpartisan.
Second.
There's a second?
Second.
Okay, discussion? Jim?
Well, my agreement to do that depends on a change in Article 10. So I would be voting against it if Article 10 is the assumed change.
Well, I think first well, yeah, that's a good point. I mean, what order you do it in? I mean, there's no point in talking if we're not going to do any endorsing, then there's no point in talking about how we endorse. So Karen's quite right. First, we have to decide, in theory, do we want to endorse? Then we can have a discussion about how we would do it.
Right.
Right.
So Jim, I mean, I'm still interested in hearing what Jim's concern is. And so Jim, if you have the floor, if you want to state what your concern is, please share it with us.
Well, in nonpartisan offices locally, I think it's a terrible mistake to require everyone to be a registered Democrat. We have not undeclared people. We should be choosing the best candidate for our local offices. And if you're not even going to interview them, not even know who the candidates are, then you shouldn't be endorsing.
Okay, fair enough. But I think we should go back to the main motion now. But Jim, thank you for sharing that.
Are there any other comments or questions before we go to the vote?
Exactly what the vote is on, that we continue to endorse.
Correct.
Yes, just that sentence.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. We did it in 2018. We did it in 2020. Other local clubs do it. It's a growing process for us, and we'll get better at it as we do it more often.
Right. And then we could discuss more about the process right after under the Article 10. So then on the continue to endorse in local nonpartisans, we'll go ahead and take a vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 Oppose? let's see. Carolee, did you catch all those?
I did not hear or see anything. Any opposed?
I'm not the FBI, you could say something. If someone's opposed, let's go ahead and say, either raise your hand now so we could, all right. So the motion passes, but let's go ahead and have a discussion now on, well, first let's get a motion regarding Article 10, the bylaw proposed changes. If we could get a motion so that we could discuss.
Yeah, I'll move adoption of the Article 10 with the understanding that once we get into the discussion, people can propose amendments which would change a particular point if they want to. But to get it on the table, I'll move adoption as proposed by the Executive Committee.
Okay, and there's a second?
Second.
All right.
Okay. Sam, I had a question about procedure here. I assume we're ending at 9 o'clock. Is that correct? Or do we have the luxury to go beyond? And if so, do we take these articles in sequence, like Article 10, and then after that, Article 3? Are we taking them as independent votes as opposed to voting on all of them?
Well, it's the wishes of the club. I mean, I think if I think we're small enough where we could maybe see if there's some changes that we need to make as a club and do it and do them, like if there's a concurrence that they're innocuous enough that we could make it, we could change it and then vote on them in their entirety, or we could take them one by one.
Let's do them one by one. I think Article 10 will generate enough discussion, but then the question is whether Article 3 is time sensitive. If we don't get to that today, is there an issue?
It's not time sensitive.
Okay, then let's begin on Article 10.
All right, are there any questions or comments? If we could go down the list here. A, that's, come on, I mean, I think we're the Democratic Club and so we're asking that they be registered Democrats. Any concerns about that?
Well, if Debbie were here, I'd like to get her take on that, but I think there may be some ramifications from the state and the national parties should we be endorsing non-Democrats.
Right.
But I don't know for sure.
There is, yes. There's a requirement that I think in what we commit to with this county, isn't it? That we don't endorse anything but a Democrat.
Jimmy,
It's you can't even interview others.
Because it's giving a voice to another.
Now you'd be giving a voice to somebody else.
Jim has his hand up. Jim Keith.
Well, I don't know about the rules from other people, but if in a local election, you don't even want to hear from anyone else about the issues, I'm sure individuals will take into account whether they're a Democrat or not. But I think everyone deserves to be listened to and people to speak to the issues. And if you're not going to do that, then I think an endorsement by the Democratic Club is less valuable.
And I agree, Jim. And I think I don't think we ever had it written down as a policy, but it really is related more to item B, which is we invite the candidates for that are seeking local office. We only endorse Democrats. But I think even with the last city council election, we invited all the candidates. Did we invite, is that the case? Am I remembering correctly?
No.
We only
No.
invited Democrats?
Yeah, we only
Yeah.
invited Democrats, I thought.
And may I interrupt because I was one of the disgruntled members at that time. And the real question was, you invited people and several candidates, or at least one candidate joined 2 days before with a bunch of supporters, and that number overwhelmed the endorsement meeting long-term, and so it was a stacked deck, so to speak, because there were no rules about how long you had to be a member of the Democratic Club, et cetera, et cetera. I would also like to point out, it was not an election forum. It was simply an endorsement process. We can have a separate election forum at Hughes Center or the park or whatever will be open in 2022 and invite all of the candidates, but there are plenty of those opportunities for all of the candidates to speak.
Yep.
Between the League of Women Voters, the Chamber of Commerce,
Active
and
Vermont.
there are plenty of opportunities. And that was not what the purpose of the endorsement procedure was, period. So.
Yeah, and I think speaking to Karen's point, if I may, in these bylaw changes, we address exactly the issue you raised in terms of specifying that people have to have been members for 30 days and so forth. And
It's
so,
under item 3, article 3.
Right.
Yeah. So we are going to address exactly.
Sure.
that.
If I might just add a comment, and it's with respect to the fact that, and it's probably more perception than it is anything else, but to kind of close the divide, not that it will ever be closed, but it would seem that by allowing the club the opportunity in a nonpartisan, by making the endorsement contingent upon party affiliation, one does undermine the purity of the concept of nonpartisan local governance and politics. So I would suggest that perhaps taking Jim's recommendations into account, that at least for those nonpartisan positions, that the club would endorse the best candidate who may not be affiliated at all, and therefore, again, be forced into perhaps an endorsement of someone because of their party affiliation alone. Just a comment about the nature of local governance and the nonpartisan commitment to nonpartisanship.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
can I make one comment on that? Because I understand what you're saying, Joe. We would always have the option to not endorse. That is,
Yes.
if we felt that there was a nonpartisan person that was head and shoulders above someone who was nominally a Democrat, but nevertheless we didn't think was as good a candidate, what we could simply do is choose not to endorse that person.
Mhm.
We couldn't be forced to endorse them. But I think to actually actively endorse somebody who's not registered could really get us in trouble with the county.
Yes, yes.
State government,
Yes,
the state party,
exactly.
rather.
Yeah, I think that is true, I think, yes. Mhm.
And to Karen's point, I do appreciate the idea of we will, for endorsements, we will only invite candidates, but for a forum, that should be open to everybody.
Sure.
If
I could also imagine some situation where we might have 2 Democrats running, let's say, for Citrus School Board or whatever, in which case the club may not want to endorse, so they don't endorse. So, and I'm sure that's happened in the past.
It just
Under-
happened.
Yeah,
Under-
well, that's true. As I
under
opened my
item I,
mouth, I
it says-
remembered.
to endorse, no endorsement or no position. So
Yeah.
we took care of the fact that we may just want to say 2 good people, we won't do anything. I do want to point out that what seems to me to be it is true, as Jim said, that if we only endorse Democrats, it weakens the position, but I think that's inescapable. And what we should do as a club is present our endorsements as we hereby endorse as the best Democratic candidates for blah, 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 so and so, and leave it open as to whether it's the best candidate or not, if we wish to make an endorsement.
Well, I wouldn't say we have to do that. We could do that.
Well, we could do that. I didn't say we had to. Yeah, I mean, it should be fairly obvious that we are only considering Democrats in the first place.
So, so no necessary we're not necessarily making any changes to item A at this point. I mean, that's going to stay as is. The concurrence on that one, that's
Yes,
that
Yeah,
shall be registered Democrat.
it
Sam,
has to be.
Sam,
Yes.
if I might propose a process here, and rather than go through each provision one at a time, we have just let people speak to whatever provision motivates them. And then, if there's nothing else that people want to say, then we vote on the whole article. I mean, we're not going to vote on A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J. That's 10 different votes.
No, I agree that, but I just wanted to, we wanted to start somewhere, and I guess rather than being all over the place, kind of keeping it in some kind of so that we could get through them. I mean, if we already had some issues over registered Democrats, I think this process will take a while. So yeah, I think though there's concurrence that we know that they can be registered Democrats. For the and then I think I don't know if we need to change the bylaws, but I think the idea that as Karen brought up, that we will invite only Democrats for the endorsement, but we will invite, when we do have forums, we will invite all the candidates.
well, that I'm not sure we're committing ourselves on the issue of forums, are we?
No,
That's not here. So we're just not saying anything about what we do with forums. What we're limited, this is what this article is dealing with, as it says, is how do we do endorsements?
that's
Yeah.
right. I agree. Incidentally, item B is the important item. Who shall we invite? Do they come seek out us, or do we seek them out? And we had troubles about that last time. So this is our way to correct that. We shall invite them
Right.
when we identify them.
And that happens as soon as they're a qualified candidate
That's correct.
for the city, and so then once the names are made public, and then we confirm their affiliation, and then we invite them.
Barbara, do you have a hand up there?
Yes, yeah, I do. I have a real problem with the fact that this is being driven because the county decided we have to do this. A lot of people are opposing this idea of only being able to endorse a Democrat. And the reason is because the county tells us we have to do that. I don't think that's right. I ran for school board. When you run for a school board, you don't run as a Republican or a Democrat. You run because of the issues going on in the school district that you think are important. And that's why people vote for you. And I would hope that's the same for city council. Our nation right now is so divided between who's a Republican and who's a Democrat. This is just making more of that. I mean, I think we should just endorse people who we agree with the issues of, not necessarily what party label they necessarily put on their ballot. So.
Just one correction, it's not just the county. I believe it's the state Democratic Party that has.
Well, I don't agree with that. Whoever is dictating that we have to do this. So. Chris ran for school board. I'm sure he ran on issues that were important to the school district and the parents in the community, not just what could be a Democratic issue or a Republican issue. So,
It's a valid point. I think, and because we are in these nonpartisan seats, it's a very valid point. But because we're the Democratic Club, I think it kind of there's other organizations that will be doing endorsements on their own with their own criteria, and I think that's and trust me, Barbara, we did have this discussion at the Democratic Executive Committee. It wasn't there's a lot of discussion on this one, so that's why we're bringing it to the board or to the general membership here for full discussion.
Can I just say something? In order to get the party requires that if we want to use the word Democrat in our name, Democratic Club of Claremont, we have to have a charter from the county that we're in. And that county is what LA County determines that we can't, the rules there are that we can't, endorse other people that are not Democrats. So if we want to keep our charter, we have to keep our charter if we want to use our name.
Well, it's more than that. I mean, if we want to be eligible for having an influence on the county organization, we want to be represented at the county conventions. If we want to be represented at the state party level and the conventions, either you're in the party or you're not in the party. Now, that doesn't mean you have to campaign for them, you have to work for them, or that other organizations you have could endorse whoever you want. But we could choose not, if we have reservations about a Democratic candidate, we could choose not to endorse them. But we can't reach out to endorse somebody who refuses to identify with the Democratic label. That's a limitation, but it's part of what you get if you're going to be within a party structure. And and the question is, are there benefits to being within being part of the Democratic Party in terms of having access to your different access to your Congress people or what have you?
Well, then the next item is one of those where we are having to put together a calendar so that we're not missing, so that these dates don't fall through the cracks and that we're on a timely manner. But basically it's outlining that, or stating that we will have special meetings if needed. A lot of this is going to happen during the time that we're typically dark as a club. So that's something to acknowledge, that we will have special meetings to meet the process for interviews and providing the recommendations and endorsements. Any discussion on that? Any discussion on the meetings being open to members?
Okay with me.
And then and there's more information on this under membership, but if approved by the board, then the candidates or the issues sponsors shall seek the general membership's approval. So the general membership is defined by Article 3. Let's see. Chris, you want to call the question?
No, I didn't say that I would call the question, but I mean, it's a question worth asking at this point. I mean, unless people have something to say about a specific provision of Article 10, we should vote on it and then move to Article 3.
Sure. I mean, that was the intent from the beginning. Any other, you're looking, you can see all the different items there. Are there any questions or comments on the remaining items on the under Article 10? I can't see everybody on my screen here, but please speak up if there's any. I think we've pretty much addressed them. The endorsement or no position.
I call the question.
Okay. All right. All those in favor of supporting Article 10 for the bylaw changes, say aye.
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 Oppose? Okay, I don't see any. All right, moving on to Article 3, membership. So this, Karen, this is to the point
Yep.
you're bringing up. So because that was a factor at the last endorsement, we did make some changes. So first, is there a motion to move discussion on Article?
So moved.
Second.
Second, okay. So yes, any discussion on this point, on this article? It really highlights what a member in good standing is, meaning they paid their dues. And then, and see, and the timing.
Actually, I think the timing is in Article 10.
Our time is 10.
10G.
Yeah, we kind of skipped that one, but I mean, we kind of went through that one real quick, but it is at least the 30 days mark, Karen.
Yep. Okay, so, so what's an associate, an honorary, a friend? We've got plenty of friendly allies, I'm sure, and inactive. That means none of them are paying dues. They're just friendly, sympathetic to the cause.
Yeah, I have a question similar to Karen's. I mean, is it the intent here just to propose a vote on what constitutes a member in good standing? And then
Sure.
everything else stays the same? I mean, have we previously defined associate, honorary, and the other categories?
I never
Sorry,
even
Karen,
heard
I
of it.
don't mean to mansplain, but that's, that's a
Yeah,
question that I
right.
had.
Yes, those have all been defined. And Debbie is the person who knows the exact definition of each. But like an associate, I think, is somebody like a high school student who isn't eligible to vote yet, but what he wants to be associated. Honorary are the few that we've given to different people. I know years ago, or I know we've given honorary memberships to,
Karen Weingard.
right. Okay,
Carolee, can I ask you a question?
yes.
And I think this is also for Sam and others. Is this Article 3 approval time sensitive? Because if it's not, then my sense is that people would feel more comfortable voting on a fuller presentation of the article that contained the other categories in their definitions.
Well,
I agree with Chris. It doesn't seem either time sensitive, and it seems very incomplete in specification of the categories. So I move we don't do anything tonight.
Carolee, you're going to mention something?
no, I'm just saying that we were only, we were making the change because of the item G in Article 10. Who is a voter, a voting member in good standing.
But we're not changing anything in Article 3, are we?
No, only adding see Article 10 endorsements,
Right.
where we're further defining what it is to have paid their annual dues. Before, we were not explicit about it being 30 days ahead of the vote.
Right. So then what Chris and Merrill already made the motion that I guess what you're asking us to do now is to take it back and define all the types of membership. Is that
Yes.
what I'm hearing? Chris, is that what you're requesting?
Well, I mean, the sense I get is that that's what the body would prefer. But now what I'm gathering from Carolee is that the only issue on the floor right now is whether to add the parenthetical in red, right? If we don't add the parenthetical in red, I don't think it's going to make any meaningful difference to the article that we already have, right?
What was the motion was not just to change that in red. It was to accept our membership, the whole article, I believe.
But the whole article is already real. The only change is what's in red. Everything else exists.
Red, correct.
Right. The only change would be in Article 3, the only change would be see Article 10 endorsements. So a member in good standing, I mean, associate members can't vote, honorary members
I
can't.
don't know that. I don't know that.
Yeah, friendly allies can't vote, and inactive inactive members can't vote. They are not in good standing.
Okay, so this is what I seem to be hearing. I seem to be hearing that people, first of all, there's nothing that's time sensitive here because we're not going to have any elections in the near future, right? The nearest election is 2022. So we can afford the wait. We'll get the whole article before us, and then we'll vote on whether to include the language in red. In the meantime, my sense is that whether or not we have the language in red, it's not going to undermine the provision that we already voted on for Article 10.
That's correct.
Agreed. And
That's
I
right.
think
So then we'll-
what we're also hearing is some desire to further change Article 3 to define these different categories.
All right, so there's a motion to send this back. Mara, is there a second?
Second,
Second,
Okay. So then we'll just send that back to executive committee and do further review on that. All right, any other business for tonight?
We
Are
have
we
to
gonna
vote on
vote?
it, don't we?
Yep.
Oh, I'm
we have
sorry.
to-
Yes. All those in favor of sending it back to executive committee so that we could look at.
aye.
I,
Aye.
Okay. All those opposed?
Mm-mm.
Very good. Well, that was anticlimactic. So any other items for tonight? Am I missing anything on anything else? So as you can see, this is what we're spending our Saturday mornings on. And Chris, you have your hand up?
Yes, Sam, I said that I wanted to say something very brief at the end of the meeting. So thanks for the people who are still here, 9:07 at night. We've already mentioned that there's going to be a discussion at City Council about the Commons project. It's not my intent to weigh in on one side or another tonight. But what I do hope is that I can enlist people's support for getting the damn site inventory out and published. We've asked for that site inventory time and time again, like a month and a half ago, and then a few weeks ago, and they keep saying, you know, they'll have it to us, it's imminent, they'll release it, and it hasn't been released. For those of people who don't know what the site inventory is, it's the list of all the opportunity sites for potential development of housing in Claremont. My understanding is that they've identified 91 acres. I'd like to know where they are, how much acreage they have, and what their potential yield is. That makes it much easier to have a meaningful discussion about these sites and their potential, and which ones are better and which ones are worse. In the absence of that, it's like you're shadow boxing. And I have to confess, I'm quite frustrated that it's taken 6 or 8 weeks or more to get this thing done when we're told it's imminent and it hasn't been released. So I think that no matter how you feel about this or that particular project, the one thing that we should be able all to agree on is we need that site inventory so that we could have a meaningful discussion.
I think it's on there. I think it's on the city's website already.
yeah,
Since when?
Chris, I've seen it.
Yeah.
Okay, let me lower my hand and explain what I mean. Now, maybe something's happened in the last couple of days, but the last time that I checked, it had the interactive map. And the interactive map is not the same as the site inventory.
Oh,
The site inventory is a table that
Okay.
lists in writing a
Okay.
description of the properties and where they're located.
and their
It's
exact
not that
size.
interactive map where people could
Okay.
put a thumbs up or thumbs down.
okay. No, I've only seen the map. I haven't seen it written, a table.
And it also has to specify exactly how many acres, and then we can have a discussion of, density and how many housing units are potential for each acre. Because, when we're talking about a specific site, the issue is, well, if we don't put the affordable housing there, do we even have enough space to put it anyplace else? Or if we don't get the affordable housing in site A, is there a site B that we can use for that, and so forth? And there are also big discussions about density, and then when we have to figure out how many housing units we have. We're obliged to come up with about 2,000 housing units over the next 8 years. That's the mandate of the state.
And what I find very interesting is currently there are only 22 houses listed for sale in all of Claremont.
Yeah.
Yep, that's true.
Jim, you have a comment?
Yes, I'm in support of Chris's comment. That map, I've talked to a number of people who, you have to expand it to actually get past the hand raised to see what property they're really highlighting. You've got to expand it greatly. It's very hard for people to know what's there. And so we need that list. The other thing is, it was initially put out with proposed densities on it. Some properties were below 30 units an acre, others were at 30, and then there was a surprise of 60 units an acre. You know, you're talking 4 to 5 story at least, was suddenly added. And the very next day, people were being called to sell their property there. I mean, there's all this stuff going on behind the scenes. And now, you know, all those densities have been removed. That whole question about whether, you know, they're really proposing 4 to 5 stories right next to a single family home, seriously. But none of it's going to be revealed until the Thursday prior to the public meeting at this rate. You know, it's the absolute last minute reveal. So I would support any effort to get more light and transparency on major decisions. Thank you.
Yeah, Sam,
Yes, Mike.
might I suggest, I've sent several emails to Brad Johnson requesting that we get the site inventory and reminding him that he has promised on several times to release that. And I might suggest that as many of us as we can send Brad Johnson an email and ask him to publish the site inventory. That would be an action that we could all take, and it doesn't take very long, 5 minutes or less.
Is this the site? This isn't the site map.
No.
So I was sharing the screen with the current site inventory for the current housing element.
Okay.
This covers the period 2018 to 2021. This is
Right.
already on the city website. What
Okay.
I'm requesting is something similar that's
Sure.
proposed for the period 2021 to 2028. We do not have that.
Yeah.
And so, you know, we're shadow boxing here. I mean, it's hard for people who agree or people who disagree to have a productive conversation with this information missing. And I personally just find that very frustrating.
Mhm.
All right. On that note, is there any other last food for thought before we could all go to bed and
Sam,
I move adjournment.
There's Sue.
sorry, I was trying to eat dinner when we first started. This is not the only situation where this has happened. I have a feeling, I think the planning, our planning area, I don't know what causes it, but it seems like lots of information is not being released. The kind of information you need to know is not being released until just right before there are public hearings. And that is really putting citizens at a disadvantage. And I don't know why. I have a feeling maybe that they're understaffed. You know, I want to think that that's probably one of the reasons. And COVID makes it even more difficult. And we're dealing in this community now with a lot of development. And I'm not sure that our city is staffed well enough in that area in order to do a really good job with the development, with the housing element, with all of this, all of the work that they have. Because it seems like it's happening more than not just the housing element. The EIR on Village South has been just lagging to, you know, when there was an EIR and then there were comments, and it's been months since the comments have not been addressed. And so I don't know what we could do to rectify the situation. It seems like things are not getting to the citizens early enough for them to understand what's going on.
And thank you, Sue, for that. And I think we all received a note regarding tomorrow's meeting and reminding people to participate. But in that note, we also state that we are going to have a discussion with the club. And maybe what we could do is add all the pending projects that are out there that we're aware of, and then also a discussion. And hopefully by then we do have the opportunity sites that the city is looking at, and have that for discussion as well. So that could be a special, or not a special meeting, but it could be a meeting that we could dedicate to the housing issues in the city, and in a position if we need to from the club. Is that something that we want to do for an upcoming meeting?
I think so.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that would be good. All right, with that, folks, good night, everyone, and hopefully your brains could go relax a little bit so you could go to sleep and not think about this stuff too much and be able to get to bed.
Yeah,
But
so
thank
stay
you
well,
all.
everybody.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you, Andy,
Night.
for the
Thank all.
presentation today. Thank you, guys.
Good night.
Good night.